I was once the king of blueprints and glass towers until they took everything from me. My name is Marcus Alden, and 3 years ago, my CFO Elise and my best friend Richard framed me for stealing company money. They planted fake papers with my signature, emptied accounts in my name, and watched me get taken away in handcuffs during our biggest meeting ever. While I sat in a prison cell, they got engaged, stole my company, and told everyone I was a criminal. The worst part? They're now cutting corners on building safety, putting lives at risk just to make more money. They think they destroyed me completely. They have no idea I'm back with a new face, a new name, and a plan to take everything they built on my broken dreams. They framed me and stole my company, but soon they'll discover their biggest investor is the man they betrayed. And I won't stop until they lose everything, just like I did. I stood at the center of the boardroom, watching. The faces of the investors light up as I revealed the final slide of my presentation. The three-dimensional rendering of Skyline Tower rotated on the screen, showing off its flowing curves and innovative sustainable features that would transform downtown. This isn't just another building, I said, feeling the confidence that came from knowing I'd created something revolutionary. This is the future of urban architecture. Carbon-negative operations, integrated green spaces, and community areas that make it a living part of the city. I could see the excitement in their eyes. The $200 million contract was practically in our hands. Skyline Innovations, the company I'd built from nothing but drafting paper and determination, was about to make history. Elise caught my eye from the back of the room and gave me that smile I'd fallen for 5 years ago. As our CFO, she'd been instrumental in securing this meeting. Her financial brilliance complemented my architectural vision perfectly. Or so I believed. Richard, my COO and best friend since our college days sharing ramen noodles in a cramped dorm room, nodded appreciatively. He'd been with me from the beginning, helping transform my sketches into a thriving business. We'll have the contracts ready next week, I concluded, shaking hands with the lead investor. Skyline Innovations appreciates your faith in our vision. Later that evening, as I reviewed the quarterly reports in preparation for the contract, signing something caught my eye. A discrepancy in our project funding allocations. Small but noticeable to someone who paid attention to details. As an architect, details were my life. Rather than immediately raising concerns, I spent the next few days quietly investigating. Numbers that didn't add up. Transactions that seemed unnecessarily complex. Nothing definitively wrong, but enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. "Everything okay?" Elise asked one night as we worked late. "You seem distracted?" "Just focused on making the contract perfect," I replied, not ready to voice my suspicions without concrete evidence. She kissed me on the cheek. "That's why you're the best, always thinking ahead." The irony of her words would haunt me later. I discovered encrypted emails between Elise and Richard a week before the contract signing. Subject line, "The plan." I couldn't access the contents, but their secrecy was concerning. They'd never hidden company matters from me before. "Elise, I've noticed some inconsistencies in the financial reports," I said carefully the next morning, watching her reaction. She laughed, touching my arm reassuringly. "Marcus, you're working too hard. Those reports are perfect, trust me." Her eyes held mine with such conviction that I almost believed her. Almost. That night, I installed monitoring software on my company devices. As CEO, it was within my rights, though it felt wrong to spy on people I trusted. The discomfort was justified when I discovered Richard had been meeting with executives from Vertex Developments, our biggest competitor. The day before the contract signing, I arrived early to finish preparations. The boardroom was already filled when I entered. Board members, Elise, Richard, and 2 police officers in uniform. "Marcus Alden," one officer said, stepping forward. "You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." I looked at Elise, expecting shock or confusion on her face. Instead, I saw only cold satisfaction as she watched the officers handcuff me. "We've discovered serious financial irregularities," Richard announced to the board, not meeting my eyes. "Bank accounts in Marcus's name containing company funds, falsified reports. The evidence is irrefutable." "This is insane," I said, looking around the room at faces that had gone from respectful to disgusted in an instant. I've been investigating discrepancies myself. Someone has set this up. No one believed me. The board voted unanimously to remove me as CEO, with Elise and Richard leading the charge. I was led out of my own building in handcuffs while employees watched in shock. From my jail cell that evening, I watched the news on a small TV. Elise and Richard stood before Skyline Innovations, my company, announcing their engagement and the company's exciting new direction. "We're devastated by Marcus's betrayal," Elise said, her performance flawless. "But Skyline will continue to innovate under our leadership." Richard added, "We're renaming the company Apex Structures to represent our fresh start, and we're pleased to announce we've secured the downtown contract." Watching them steal my life's work while pretending to be victims made my blood boil. But even then, my mind was working, analyzing, planning. My lawyer visited the next day, with grim news. "The evidence against you is substantial. Your signatures on transfer authorizations. Your fingerprints on documents. They've built a solid case." "It's all fabricated," I insisted. "I need to fight this." "That could take years," he warned. "And with no counter-evidence yet, you'd likely remain in custody during the trial." I made a decision that would surprise everyone, including Elise and Richard. Instead of fighting a lengthy battle, I negotiated a plea deal for a lesser charge. "You're giving up?" my lawyer asked, confused by my sudden change in strategy. "No." I smiled for the first time since my arrest. "I'm being strategic." Before entering prison, I managed one critical task: transferring a portion of my personal funds to an offshore account under an alias. It wasn't much compared to what I'd lost, but it would be enough to start again. My 18-month sentence began, with a plan already forming. Elise and Richard believed they'd destroyed me completely. They thought they were brilliant, untouchable. They had no idea that their perfect crime had created their perfect nemesis. Inside those prison walls, I wasn't just serving time. I was preparing, learning, transforming. Every day strengthened my resolve. Every night I remembered their betrayal in perfect detail, letting it fuel me rather than break me. They wanted Marcus Alden eliminated. Instead, they created someone far more dangerous. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to reclaim. Someone who understood their methods and weaknesses intimately. They would regret the day they chose to frame me and steal my company. Because one day I would return, and when I did, they wouldn't recognize me until it was far too late. Prison became my university of revenge. While other inmates wasted time, playing cards or watching television, I devoured every book on financial systems, corporate espionage, and strategic investment I could find in the limited library. I analyzed my mistakes not in trusting Elise and Richard, but in failing to protect myself from such a possibility. 3 months into my sentence, I met Leo Zhang in the prison yard. He stood apart from the other inmates, observing everything with calculating eyes. Former hedge fund manager serving 5 years for insider trading that made his clients millions. "You're the architect," he said, approaching me one day, "the one they framed." I tensed, wary of new alliances. "What's it to you?" "I recognize a fellow player when I see one." He smiled slightly. "And I recognize when someone is planning rather than just serving time." Leo became my mentor in financial warfare. He explained the intricate networks of shell companies, the art of information leverage, and how to move money invisibly across borders. In return, I taught him about architectural principles and structural integrity, metaphors that soon applied to our shared strategy. "Your mistake," Leo told me one day, "was building a company with a foundation others could undermine. Next time, you build differently." By the time I was released after 18 months, I had something more valuable than freedom. I had a blueprint for justice. My first stop wasn't home, but a private clinic in Switzerland that specialized in subtle facial adjustments. Nothing dramatic, just enough to alter my appearance while maintaining natural features. Slightly narrowed jawline, minor nose refinement, changed eye color through permanent contacts. I grew my hair longer and cultivated a short beard. Next, came voice coaching from a former stage actor in London. I developed a slight European accent, neither too strong nor too specific, and lowered my natural speaking tone. I practiced until the new voice became as natural as breathing. With my offshore funds, I created Sebastian Vale, an enigmatic investor with a passion for architectural innovation. My background was deliberately vague, with hints of family money and European education. I established residence in 3 different countries, creating a paper trail that was both legitimate and difficult to fully trace. Leo, released 6 months after me due to good behavior, joined my operation. His connections in the financial world proved invaluable as we constructed a network of shell companies across multiple jurisdictions. Each entity appeared independent but ultimately connected back to me through a labyrinth of ownership structures that would take years to unravel. Patience is your greatest weapon, Leo reminded me as I watched Apex structures from afar, tracking their projects and stock performance. Build your position invisibly until it's too strong to counter. For 3 years after my release, I never once came close to Elise or Richard. Instead, I established Sebastian Vale as a legitimate and respected presence in architectural investment circles. I turned around several failing projects, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of architectural potential that impressed industry leaders. My strategy was methodical. First, I acquired minority stakes in suppliers that Apex depended on. Then I purchased shares in their lending institutions. Finally, I began buying their debt through different entities, becoming their creditor without their knowledge. Each step brought me closer to the heart of what had once been my company. Through carefully cultivated business contacts, I learned that Elise and Richard had continued their fraudulent practices, expanding them to cut corners on building materials while maintaining premium pricing. They're endangering lives, I told Leo one evening as we reviewed reports from an industry insider I'd paid for information. The support structures in their Heritage Plaza project are using substandard concrete mixtures. Leo nodded grimly. They've grown sloppy, arrogant. They believe they're untouchable. Their personal lives revealed equally exploitable weaknesses. Richard had developed a gambling problem, losing substantial sums at private poker games. Elise had begun an affair with a city official who oversaw building permits, a relationship she kept hidden from both her husband and the public. Most importantly, their relationship had deteriorated. What had once seemed like a passionate partnership had devolved into a marriage of convenience marked by mutual suspicion. They stayed together for appearance and financial entanglement, not love. They betrayed you, Leo observed. Now they're beginning to betray each other. By the 3rd anniversary of my imprisonment, Sebastian Vale was ready to make his move. I had established enough of a reputation that when I expressed interest in Apex's newest project, it created immediate buzz in investment circles. My first glimpse of Elise came at a charity gala benefiting urban renewal projects. She wore an elegant black dress, her hair swept up to reveal the diamond necklace I had once given her, now presumably a gift she claimed came from Richard. The sight of her stirred nothing in me but cold determination. I arranged to be seated, at her table, introduced by a mutual acquaintance as the investment genius with an architect's eye. When we shook hands, I felt a momentary thrill at how completely she failed to recognize me. Sebastian Vale, I said in my cultivated accent. I've admired your company's vision from afar. Elise Hayes, she replied using Richard's surname now. Any admirer of good architecture is welcome at my table. Up close I could see the strain beneath her polished exterior, the slight tightness around her eyes, the practiced nature of her smile. Success had not brought her peace. I charmed the table with insights about contemporary architecture, watching her grow increasingly intrigued by my knowledge. When I mentioned specific elements of sustainable design that had once been my passion, she leaned forward with genuine interest. You speak like an architect, Mr. Vale, not just an investor, she observed. I smiled. I considered that path once. Life had other plans. Richard arrived late to the gala, the slight unsteadiness in his walk suggesting he'd had several drinks before arriving. When we were introduced, he studied me with narrowed eyes. Have we met before? He asked, frowning slightly. I don't believe so, I replied calmly, though my heart raced at the momentary suspicion. I would remember. You remind me of someone, he persisted. Elise laughed, touching his arm in warning. Richard, don't interrogate Mr. Vale. He's considering investing in our Riverside project. That immediately diverted his attention, and the moment of danger passed. Still, I noted that Richard's instincts were sharper than Elise's, despite his growing addiction issues. As the evening concluded, I left them with the impression of a wealthy, knowledgeable investor who might be their financial salvation. Little did they know that Sebastian Vale was already deeply embedded in their business ecosystem, quietly positioning himself for the perfect strike. They have no idea who they're dealing with, Leo said as we left the gala. I watched Elise and Richard depart in their luxury car, the strain between them visible even at a distance. No, and that's exactly the way I want it. Over the next month, I carefully engineered multiple accidental meetings with Elise at industry events, each time deepening her interest in Sebastian Vale. I spoke of architectural philosophy with passion that resonated with her, reminding her of conversations we once had when she still pretended to care about my vision, rather than just profits. Your perspective is refreshing, she told me over lunch at an exclusive restaurant. Most investors only care about return timelines, not the soul of the buildings. A structure without soul is merely a box, I replied, quoting words I had spoken to her years ago. Longevity comes from meaning, not just materials. I saw recognition flicker in her eyes, but not of me. Rather, she recognized the truth she had once valued before greed consumed her. My infiltration accelerated when I expressed interest in Apex's flagship riverfront development project. Elise immediately arranged a private tour of the construction site, eager to secure my investment. We're revolutionizing the concept of mixed-use spaces, she explained as we walked through the half-finished structure. Retail, residential, and office space in perfect harmony. I examined exposed beams and support structures with a critical eye, noting multiple areas where inferior materials had been substituted for what the plan specified. My architectural knowledge allowed me to spot these deficiencies instantly, though I carefully masked my concerns. Impressive vision, I commented neutrally. The execution seems efficient. We pride ourselves on bringing projects in under budget and ahead of schedule, she boasted. I imagine that requires certain compromises, I suggested innocently. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We never compromise on quality, Mr. Vale. Sebastian, please, I corrected her, and I meant no offense. Every successful project balances multiple priorities. Richard joined us for dinner that evening, clearly uncomfortable with my presence despite the potential investment I represented. His drinking had worsened since the gala, and he ordered a third scotch before the main course arrived. So, Sebastian, he said, studying me intently, what brings you to our little architectural corner of the world? Surely a man of your means has many investment opportunities. I'm drawn to vision, I replied smoothly, and to people who know how to execute it. Or perhaps to companies undergoing cash flow challenges, he suggested with surprising sharpness, revealing he wasn't as impaired as he appeared. Elise shot him a warning glance. Richard, I smiled, unperturbed. Every company faces challenges. What matters is how they're addressed. Exactly, Elise interjected, and we're addressing ours with innovation and efficiency. As dinner progressed, I observed the dynamics between them. The tension was palpable. Richard's suspicion of me seemed almost instinctual, while Elise's eagerness to secure my investment overrode any caution. They barely spoke directly to each other, communicating through me instead. I declined Richard's suggestion of poker afterward, citing an early meeting. His disappointment confirmed my intelligence about his gambling habit. Another time, he insisted, clearly hoping to recoup losses at my expense. I look forward to it, I lied pleasantly. Over the following weeks, I gradually positioned myself as a serious potential investor while gathering critical intelligence. Through carefully placed contacts at City Hall, I confirmed Elise's affair with Building Commissioner Michael Donovan, documenting their meetings at a downtown hotel. My shell company acquired a small but significant stake in the primary material supplier for Apex, giving me access to their delivery records. The evidence of corner cutting was substantial and damning. Load-bearing supports rated for significantly less weight than specified, insulation materials that failed fire safety standards, concrete mixtures diluted below code requirements. They're creating death traps, Leo observed as we reviewed the documentation in our secure office. One major earthquake or fire could be catastrophic. And putting their names on the buildings as paragons of modern architecture, I added. The same way they put my name on financial crimes I never committed. Through another contact at their bank, I learned Apex was over-leveraged, having expanded too rapidly after taking over my company. Their spectacular growth had been fueled by dangerous financial gambles and material substitutions rather than genuine innovation. I also discovered that Richard's gambling losses had escalated dramatically, putting him in debt to some dangerous people. He had begun skimming corporate funds to cover these debts, hiding the theft even from Elise. Meanwhile, Elise had been falsifying project completion reports to accelerate payments from investors, a practice that created short-term cash flow but long-term vulnerability. She hadn't told Richard about these manipulations, creating a situation where neither trusted the other, but both depended on their shared secrets. My opportunity to exploit these fractures came during a private meeting with Elise to discuss potential investment terms. Your Riverside Heights project has remarkable potential, I said, but I've heard concerning whispers about regulatory issues. She maintained her composure, but I noticed her fingers tighten around her pen. Nothing unusual. All major projects face scrutiny. Of course, I nodded sympathetically. Though I wonder if Commissioner Donovan's involvement might complicate matters if those rumors reached certain ears. Her face paled slightly. You seem very well informed, Sebastian. Information is the foundation of wise investment, I replied mildly, just as trust is the foundation of partnership. Are you implying something about my relationship with the Commissioner? Her voice was steady, but her eyes revealed calculation, assessing how much I knew. I'm merely suggesting that personal relationships can impact business, for better or worse. She studied me for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I believe Apex would benefit from a significant strategic investment, one that includes certain oversight provisions to ensure regulatory compliance. Richard won't agree to outside oversight, she said automatically. I smiled. Perhaps you might persuade him, unless his recent financial activities make him resistant to scrutiny. Her expression confirmed my suspicion. She knew something was wrong with Richard's finances, but not the specific details. I'll speak with him, she conceded. I planted similar seeds with Richard the following day, hinting at my awareness of Elise's financial manipulations without revealing I knew about his gambling debts. His paranoia made him particularly susceptible to suggestions that Elise might be operating behind his back. Partners should have no secrets, I remarked casually after outlining my investment interest. Transparency prevents unfortunate surprises. His eyes narrowed. What do you know about Elise's operations? Only what regular due diligence reveals, I replied, though sometimes financial reporting timelines raise questions. The trap was set. Over the next several weeks, I watched as Richard began questioning Elise's decisions more openly. She, in turn, increased her scrutiny of his department's expenditures. The trust between them, already fragile, began to fracture visibly. Meanwhile, I arranged for the first of several anonymous tips to regulatory authorities about potential safety concerns at Apex construction sites. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger full investigations yet, just sufficient to create pressure and anxiety. During this period, I continued to cultivate relationships with Apex board members, expressing both enthusiasm for the company's potential and subtle concerns about current management practices. Each conversation laid groundwork for future alliance when the moment of truth arrived. The first phase of my infiltration was complete. I had identified their vulnerabilities, established myself as a potential savior, and began applying pressure to their weakest points. Neither Elise nor Richard suspected that the mysterious Sebastian Vale was systematically dismantling the empire they had stolen from me. "They're beginning to crumble from within," Leo observed as we reviewed our progress. "And they still have no idea who's really behind it," I replied with grim satisfaction. My acquisition of Apex's debt began in earnest, through a carefully orchestrated financial maneuver. Using 6 different shell companies across 3 countries, I purchased their outstanding loans from various lenders at slightly below market value. The lenders were happy to offload what they increasingly viewed as risky debt, unaware that all their separate transactions were going to the same ultimate owner. "Each lender thinks they're selling to a different entity," Leo explained to our small team of financial specialists. "None can see the complete picture." Within 6 weeks, I controlled nearly 70% of Apex's total debt obligations without their knowledge. This leverage alone would have been sufficient to exert enormous pressure, but I had no intention of showing my hand prematurely. Instead, I accelerated the regulatory scrutiny I had initiated. Through anonymous tips to building inspectors, I highlighted specific areas of concern in 3 Apex projects currently under construction. The tips were detailed and technical, impossible to dismiss as frivolous complaints. I watched from my car across the street as the inspectors arrived at their flagship Riverside Heights project. Elise rushed to the site within 30 minutes, her face tight with concern. Richard was nowhere to be seen, likely nursing a hangover from another late night of gambling. The inspectors flagged numerous violations, though still only a fraction of the actual deficiencies I had documented. It was enough to halt construction temporarily and require expensive remediation work, placing further strain on their already precarious finances. At our next meeting, Elise tried to maintain her composure, but the strain showed in the dark circles under her eyes and her clipped responses. "A minor setback," she assured me when I inquired about the inspection results. "These things happen in construction." "Of course," I nodded sympathetically, "though I understand the remediations will be costly." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing we can't handle." "I'm pleased to hear it. My offer to invest remains open, including the assistance with regulatory compliance I mentioned." She hesitated, clearly torn between pride and necessity. "The board is considering several options. Naturally, though time may be a factor given the construction delays and their impact on your delivery commitments." The pressure continued to build. The following week, a financial reporter published an article questioning Apex's stability based on their recent regulatory issues and project delays. The company's stock dropped 12% in a single day. I arranged to meet Richard for lunch, finding him uncharacteristically subdued. The confident man who had once presented fabricated evidence against me now hunched over his drink, eyes darting nervously around the restaurant. "Bad day on the market," I observed mildly. "Vulture journalists," he muttered. "One negative article and everyone panics." "Markets dislike uncertainty," I agreed, "though I maintain my confidence in Apex's fundamentals." He looked up sharply. "Are you still interested in investing?" "Under the right governance structure, absolutely." His expression darkened. "Elise mentioned your interest in oversight. Provisions. That's not how we operate." "Perhaps circumstances warrant reconsideration of operational norms," I suggested gently. "Adaptation is the key to survival." "I don't need business philosophy from an outsider," he snapped, then immediately composed himself. "I apologize, the pressure has been substantial." "No need to apologize, pressure reveals character." The irony of my statement was lost on him. The man who had betrayed his best friend now feared betrayal from all sides, including his wife. The seeds of doubt I had planted were flourishing in the fertile soil of his paranoia. 2 days later, another anonymous tip led to inspectors discovering serious fire safety violations in a recently completed Apex office building. The media coverage was extensive, with one news channel showing footage of inadequate fireproofing materials around structural supports. The following morning, Apex's stock plummeted another 17%. Their largest project investor announced a review of all contract terms. Richard and Elise issued a joint statement assuring stakeholders of the company's commitment to safety, but the damage was done. Leo monitored their increasingly desperate financial maneuvers as they attempted to manage the crisis. They've taken out high-interest emergency loans and liquidated personal assets, he reported. Richard sold his vintage car collection yesterday. And Elise? I asked. She's been meeting with other potential investors, but no one's biting. The blood is in the water. I scheduled an emergency meeting with Apex's full board of directors, positioning myself as their potential savior rather than another circling predator. In the imposing boardroom that had once been mine, I presented my proposal with calm authority. Apex faces a crisis of confidence rather than a crisis of competence, I began, offering them a face-saving narrative. The company's vision remains sound, but market perception has created a dangerous liquidity situation. Several board members nodded in agreement, relieved by my diplomatic framing of their catastrophic failures. I propose a substantial capital injection through my investment group, sufficient to address the regulatory remediation costs and stabilize operations. Elise leaned forward. We're open to investment, but control remains with current management. I smiled gently. The capital markets disagree with that position, I'm afraid. My proposal includes temporary oversight provisions to restore investor confidence. Temporary? Richard questioned. With specific performance triggers for restoration of full management autonomy, I clarified. Plus generous retention packages for key executives, including yourselves. The financial terms I outlined were actually quite fair on the surface. What I didn't mention was that the performance targets would be impossible to meet, given what I knew about their operations and what I had planned next. These terms also include access to all financial and operational systems for my due diligence team, I added. Standard procedure for an investment of this magnitude. Richard started to object, but Elise cut him off. We'll need to discuss privately. Of course, I agreed. Though I should mention this offer expires in 48 hours. Other distressed assets await if we cannot reach agreement. As the board members filed out for their private discussion, I caught snippets of their conversation. Most favored accepting my terms, seeing no viable alternative. Richard resisted the loss of control, while Elise seemed willing to compromise to save what they had built. They returned within 30 minutes, faces grim, but resolved. We accept your preliminary terms, Elise announced. Pending final documentation. Excellent, I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor while inwardly savoring this pivotal moment. My team will begin due diligence immediately. The access they granted my team proved even more valuable than I had anticipated. Within days, we discovered the full extent of their fraudulent practices, building code violations and financial manipulations. Every document was carefully preserved and organized as evidence. Most crucially, we found internal communications discussing the original conspiracy against me, removing any doubt about their deliberate actions. Emails between Elise and Richard explicitly discussed fabricating evidence, bribing a bank official, and their plan to take control of my company. It's all here, Leo said as we reviewed the evidence in our secure office. Everything we need to destroy them completely. And legally, I added. That's important. With full system access, I also ensured that key building inspections would occur at precisely the right moments, uncovering the most damaging violations at their flagship project. The subsequent scandal erupted exactly as planned, forcing a complete halt to all Apex construction activities. As their company veered toward bankruptcy, I tightened my grip on every aspect of their operation while appearing to be their only hope for survival. The trap was set, the evidence secured, and my targets were exactly where I wanted them, wholly dependent on Sebastian Vale for their corporate survival. What they didn't realize was that Sebastian Vale was merely a mask, and beneath it Marcus Alden was finally ready for his revenge. The next phase of my plan required precision timing and absolute control. With full access to Apex's systems and operations, I began methodically turning board members against Elise and Richard's leadership. I arranged private meetings with each director, sharing carefully selected evidence of management failures. I remained committed to saving Apex, I assured each of them. But we must address the root causes of the current crisis. To the risk management director, I showed documentation of safety violations that could create catastrophic liability. To the financial director, I revealed the true extent of their fiscal manipulations. To others, I demonstrated how Richard and Elise had consistently misled them about the company's actual condition. I never suggested outright that the board should remove them from leadership. The evidence spoke for itself, and the directors reached that conclusion independently, exactly as I had calculated they would. Meanwhile, the building inspectors I had anonymously tipped uncovered critical safety violations in Apex's flagship Riverside Heights project. The inspectors had no idea they were being guided to look in specific locations where I knew problems existed. They believed they were simply doing their jobs thoroughly. The resulting scandal dominated local news for days. Luxury death traps read one headline. Apex cuts corners, endangers lives, declared another. Interviews with former employees I had cultivated painted a picture of a company where profit consistently overrode safety. Elise called me in a panic at midnight after the story broke. "Sebastian, we need to move up the timeline on your investment. Things are escalating faster than anticipated." "I understand," I replied calmly. "I've been monitoring the situation. Perhaps we should discuss more comprehensive options." "What do you mean?" "The Apex brand may be irreparably damaged. I'm considering a complete acquisition rather than merely an investment." The silence on the line told me she was calculating rapidly. The board would never approve a full sale under these conditions. The valuation would be disastrous. Perhaps, but existence at a discount valuation might be preferable to bankruptcy and potential criminal liability. She agreed to meet the following morning. When she arrived at my office, the strain of recent weeks showed clearly on her face. The polished, confident woman who had once plotted my downfall now looked haunted. "Richard refuses to consider a complete sale," she said, immediately. "He thinks we can still salvage this." "And you?" I asked, studying her closely. She sighed, dropping the corporate mask momentarily. "I think we're finished. The question is whether we walk away with something or nothing." "An honest assessment," I nodded. "I appreciate that." "Can you protect us from potential liability if we agree to sell?" she asked directly. "I believe a properly structured transaction could insulate former management from certain civil claims," I offered, carefully. "Criminal matters are more complex, of course." She paled slightly at the mention of criminal liability. "This was never supposed to go this far. The material substitution was Richard's initiative." I objected. I noted her immediate attempt to distance herself from the most damaging decisions exactly as I had predicted. Documentation of such objections would certainly be valuable in any investigation. "I might have some relevant communications," she said, her self-preservation instinct clearly overriding any loyalty to Richard. "That could be helpful," I encouraged. "For now, let's focus on a potential structure for acquisition." I outlined a proposal involving a complex merger that would effectively give me complete control while maintaining the appearance of a partnership. The terms seemed generous on the surface, offering Richard and Elise significant cash payments and consulting roles with the new entity. "Richard will insist on operational involvement," she warned. "That can be accommodated initially," I replied, knowing such provisions would be rendered meaningless once my full plan unfolded. She left with a draft agreement, visibly relieved to have a potential escape route. I immediately called Leo to update him. "She's turning on Richard already," I reported, just as we anticipated. "And the board?" he asked. "An emergency meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. 3 directors have already indicated privately that they'll support replacing current management." The board meeting was even more decisive than I had hoped. After reviewing the mounting evidence of mismanagement, 7 of 9 directors voted to remove Richard immediately and place Elise on administrative leave pending a full investigation. They appointed an interim CEO and approved exploring my acquisition proposal as their best option for survival. Richard didn't accept his termination gracefully. Security cameras captured his explosive reaction as he was escorted from the building, threatening lawsuits against the board and Elise. Specifically, his public meltdown was covered by local business media, further damaging Apex's already tattered reputation. Elise, ever the strategist, negotiated her cooperation with the board's investigation in exchange for more favorable separation terms. She provided additional documentation of Richard's decisions regarding material substitutions, effectively positioning him as the primary culprit while minimizing her involvement. What she didn't realize was that I already possessed evidence proving her equal participation in all major decisions, including explicit approval of the substandard materials to increase profit margins. With Richard and Elise neutralized professionally, I accelerated preparations for the final phase of my plan. Legal teams drafted the merger agreement, deliberately structuring it to give me complete control once executed. Financial analysts prepared valuation reports justifying the heavily discounted acquisition price. Most importantly, I organized an elaborate merger announcement gala, scheduled for exactly 3 years after Elise and Richard had announced their engagement and company takeover on the day of my arrest. The symmetry was not coincidental. The guest list included industry leaders, financial press, regulatory officials, and every board member who had voted to remove me based on fabricated evidence. I wanted witnesses for what would follow. In the week before the gala, I personally reviewed all the evidence we had gathered, organizing it into a devastating presentation. Videos, emails, financial records, and witness statements created an irrefutable narrative of fraud, betrayal, and reckless endangerment. Leo supervised final security arrangements, ensuring every exit would be covered by our people. "Are you certain about revealing yourself?" he asked. "You could complete the acquisition as Sebastian Vale and destroy them without ever showing your hand." I shook my head. They need to know exactly who brought them down. That moment of recognition is non-negotiable. The night before the gala, I stood before my mirror, removing the subtle elements of my Sebastian Vale disguise one by one. The tinted contacts came out, revealing my natural eye color. The carefully trimmed beard was shaved away. The longer hairstyle was cut back to a shorter, more familiar style. I studied my reflection, seeing Marcus Alden emerge from behind the mask I had worn for years. The face was older, with new lines etched by experience, but the eyes held the same determination they always had. "Tomorrow," I told my reflection, "we reclaim what was taken." The venue for the gala was the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, decorated with architectural models of Apex's projects, including several that I had originally designed before the company was stolen from me. The irony was not lost on me as I surveyed the space during final preparations. Everything was in place. The evidence was loaded into the presentation system. Security teams were positioned. Statements for the press were prepared. The legal documents awaited signatures. After years of planning, months of infiltration, and weeks of increasing pressure, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Tomorrow, Elise and Richard would discover that the investor they had pinned their hopes on, the man they believed would save them from ruin, was actually the architect of their destruction. They had framed me and stolen my company, never imagining I would return as their biggest investor. Their empire was about to crumble, and I would be there to witness every moment of their fall. The gala ballroom glittered with the false optimism of a corporate rescue. Elegant floral arrangements, subtle lighting, and champagne created an atmosphere of celebration rather than the funeral it actually was. I surveyed the gathering crowd from a private anteroom, watching through one-way glass as the city's elite mingled, unaware they were about to witness a corporate execution. Elise arrived first, wearing a deep blue gown that complemented her calculated poise. She moved through the crowd with practiced charm, though I noted the tension in her shoulders. Despite her outward confidence, she knew this merger represented her last chance at salvaging anything from the wreckage of Apex. Richard entered 30 minutes later, against the explicit wishes of the board. His dismissal had clearly done nothing to diminish his sense of entitlement. He looked disheveled despite his expensive suit, the effects of recent heavy drinking evident in his puffy face and bloodshot eyes. The interim CEO welcomed everyone and announced the evening's schedule. First cocktails and networking, then my presentation on the merger vision, followed by the formal signing ceremony. The timing was precise, allowing no opportunity for Elise or Richard to interfere once events were set in motion. Leo approached me in the anteroom. Final security check complete, all exits covered, legal team standing by. "And our guests of honor?" I asked. Elise has been working the room, shoring up support among remaining allies. Richard has already had 3 drinks and gotten into an argument with a board member. I smiled. Predictable to the end. At precisely 8 o'clock, I made my entrance, as Sebastian Vale, investor and savior. The room quieted as I approached the podium, all eyes fixed on the mysterious figure who had emerged from nowhere to rescue Apex Structures. "Good evening," I began, my voice still carrying the slight European accent I had cultivated. "I am honored to stand before you on this historic occasion." I saw Elise watching me intently from the front row, her expression a mixture of relief and wariness. Richard stood at the back, arms crossed defensively, still believing he could somehow regain control. Before we proceed with the merger announcement, I would like to share my perspective on what brings us together tonight. This is not merely a business transaction, but a story about justice and restoration. A murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. This was not the standard corporate merger speech they had expected. 3 years ago, a visionary architectural firm called Skyline Innovations was destroyed by fraud. Not fraud committed by its founder, as the public was led to believe, but fraud perpetrated against him by those he trusted most. Elise's posture stiffened. Richard took an involuntary step forward, suddenly alert despite his intoxication. I gestured to the large screen behind me, which illuminated with documents and photographs. Evidence that was suppressed or fabricated, financial records that were manipulated, a deliberate conspiracy to destroy one man's reputation and steal his life's work. The room had gone completely silent. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances as they began to realize what was happening. The founder of that company was framed for crimes he never committed by his CFO and his best friend, who then married each other and built an empire on his ruins. I clicked to the next slide, showing security camera footage of Elise copying my signature and Richard planting falsified documents on my computer. The timestamp and location were clearly visible. This evidence was available but ignored during the original investigation. I have since uncovered much more. Elise rose from her seat, her face a mask of controlled panic. "Sebastian, this is hardly the venue for historical grievances. We should focus on the future of Apex." I smiled directly at her. "I agree completely about focusing on the future, but first we must correctly understand the past." The next slides showed emails between Elise and Richard, discussing their plan to take control of my company months before my arrest. Their explicit acknowledgement of fabricating evidence, their celebration when the plan succeeded. Since taking control, these same individuals have continued their fraudulent practices, endangering public safety through substandard construction materials and falsified safety inspections. Regulatory officials in attendance leaned forward with professional interest as I displayed internal communications authorizing the substitution of inferior materials, along with falsified certification documents. Richard finally found his voice. "This is slander. Who are you to make these accusations?" The moment had arrived. I removed the tinted contacts that had been part of my disguise, blinking briefly as my natural eye color was revealed to the room. "My name is not Sebastian Vale," I announced, my voice dropping its affected accent. "My name is Marcus Alden, the founder of Skyline Innovations, the architect you framed for fraud, imprisoned, and left for dead." The collective gasp was audible. Elise sank back into her chair, her perfect composure finally shattered. Richard lunged toward the exit only to find his path blocked by Leo and 2 security officers. "Every document you've seen is authentic and has been provided to the appropriate authorities," I continued. The merger documents you were about to sign would have transferred all Apex assets to a holding company I control, while personally indemnifying me from any claims against the company. I turned directly to the board members who had once voted to remove me. You chose to believe lies without proper investigation. Your negligence enabled fraud and endangered public safety. Your legal liabilities are substantial, though perhaps not as severe as those facing the architects of this conspiracy. Elise stood again, desperation now visible beneath her polished exterior. Marcus, we can fix this. There must be some arrangement that benefits everyone. There is, I agreed. Justice. At my signal, 2 federal agents stepped forward from where they had been waiting unobtrusively among the guests. One moved toward Elise, the other toward Richard. Federal agents are here with warrants for their arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, document falsification, and criminal negligence, I explained to the stunned audience. Additionally, civil litigation will commence immediately to recover damages for the victims of their actions, including homeowners and tenants in buildings constructed with substandard materials. Richard broke free momentarily from the security guard and shouted, "This is insane. You have no proof that will stand up in court." Leo stepped forward, holding up a flash drive. "Actually, we have your complete server archives, including deleted emails and financial records, plus testimony from 16 former employees and contractors who participated in or witnessed fraudulent activities." The agents proceeded with the arrests, reading rights as smartphones captured the moment from every angle. The press representatives I had invited ensured this would be front-page news by morning. Once Elise and Richard had been escorted out, I addressed the remaining guests. I have no desire to run Apex Structures or profit from its remains. Effective immediately, I am transferring all assets and projects to the Alden Foundation for Sustainable Architecture, which will complete all current projects using proper materials and methods, compensate affected homeowners for remediation, and rebuild the company with ethical leadership. A board member stepped forward. And what happens to the board? Those who knowingly participated in fraud will face appropriate consequences. Those who were merely negligent have an opportunity to make amends by assisting in the transition and remediation efforts. The forensic accounting team I had assembled took the stage next, presenting irrefutable evidence that the original allegations against me had been fabricated. Bank records showing transfers that never originated from my accounts but were made to appear as if they had. Timestamps proving documents had been created while I was demonstrably elsewhere. By the end of the evening, the complete reversal of fortune was clear to everyone present. What had begun as a celebration of a corporate merger had transformed into the public rehabilitation of my name and the beginning of criminal proceedings against those who had betrayed me. As the event concluded, Leo joined me at the window overlooking the city skyline. "Satisfied?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. Not satisfied. Justice doesn't erase what happened, but it does allow for a new beginning. 6 months. Later, I stood on the roof of the redesigned Riverside Heights building, now completed to my original specifications, with proper materials and safety features. Below me, workers removed the last Apex logo from the construction fence, replacing it with the Alden Foundation emblem. On a nearby television screen in the site office, a news report showed Elise and Richard being led into court for sentencing. They had both pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, but still faced substantial prison terms and complete financial ruin. They would experience exactly what they had inflicted on me, measure for measure. The foundation I established had successfully rescued most of Apex's projects, retrofitting those with safety issues and completing others according to proper standards. Former clients and homeowners were being compensated for necessary repairs. My reputation had been fully restored, with architectural journals publishing detailed analyses of how my innovative designs had been compromised after my removal. I no longer needed to hide behind Sebastian Vale's identity. Marcus Alden had returned to the architectural world, wiser and more cautious, but still committed to the vision of sustainable, beautiful structures that enhanced human lives. The betrayal had changed me. I was not the same trusting person who had been blindsided by those closest to him. But in reclaiming my name and purpose, I had found something more valuable than revenge. I had found resilience and the opportunity to rebuild not just buildings but a legacy that would outlast the pain of betrayal. As I looked out over the city skyline I had once dreamed of transforming, I felt the weight of the past 3 years finally begin to lift. They had framed me and stolen my company, not knowing I would return as their biggest investor. And in the end, justice had been served in the most complete way possible. I had reclaimed everything they had taken, while they lost everything they had gained.